Good.
Let's get it done. Well, like I just said, thank you, the beautiful man who's now joining me on this live podcast. I appreciate you. How's your day going, dude?
Ryan, you really want to start there? The poor audience is going to be like, what the hell? So I got a
He's a
text this
beautiful
morning.
man.
I got a text this morning from my mom saying that my dad had a TIA, so transient ischemic attack. He's
Oh wow.
okay. Called 911, went to the hospital. My parents are active, they take
Mm,
good care of their health, they're in their early 70s. But
mm,
it's one of those things that living across the country is sort of existentially threatening, right? So anyway, I have a
yeah,
plan to come home this summer and so
yeah,
he's good and I've been just
yeah,
getting some info from mom. So it's like, well, so everybody listening is like, well,
yeah.
that's not how we normally start podcasts. And then
Yeah.
I
Who
had some
gives a fuck though?
plans.
That's crazy.
And then we had this whole fiasco on Facebook where I caught an account who'd been plagiarizing a bunch of my
Saw that.
stuff. So
Hmm.
anyway, that was there was an apology there. That's like the sort of stupid shit that we deal with. We put it in context of like, family health versus like,
Oh yeah.
social media posts, right? So it runs a gamut, and we've just now got marketing materials for my event in Edmonton in September,
That's right.
The Evolve Strength Business and Coaching Conference. So that'll be all over
Yes.
right away. So that's a
Fuck
whole
yeah.
bunch of stuff. But
I love you already.
let's let's
That's exactly
let's
how my brain works.
let's give the oh yeah, my brain too. Let's give the audience what they're interested in because we've kind of lit them up. This is not how normally podcasts usually start out.
Well, like, hey, this is honestly, dude, this is how mine go because I'm I have here. So let me give you a little context. My
Mm.
goal, I have no intention with this. I just want to have a good conversation, get to know you, have the audience get to know you. Maybe we'll get some tangible stuff, but like the real nit and gritty, I feel like people always appreciate is like your story, what you're going through, what you're feeling. So like first to comment on your dad, scariest shit in the world, right? When like I think my mom told me my mom's almost 60. She's gonna be 64 this year. She would have hated if I added a year to that. But and she listens to this podcast. Shout out mom. But she fell not too long ago, like, like a few weeks ago, and she's been doing it more and more. So I hear you when when some things just start happening to the parents, you're like not even near each other. It is the scariest shit, and you feel so helpless because it's completely out of your control.
You referenced something interesting. Maybe I'll run with this one. You know, mom falling, and I think our generation. Again, I'm a little bit
Mhm.
older, but my folks in their early 70s. When I was younger.
Mm.
I think the generation before that, it was seen as normal to like get old and deteriorate, right? And I think it's not
Mm.
necessarily a fair proxy, but a bit of a proxy is, anybody listening knows who the Golden Girls are, right? Like I grew up watching that show, right? And you sometimes will see the memes of like one of them, Blanche. Blanche is the one who's the more risque. And when the show started, she's actually in, I think, her late 50s, mid to late 50s. And then you show like pictures of women like Jennifer Lopez or Jennifer Aniston who are the same age, who look, like again, this Hollywood stuff or whatever, but look like they're 30, whereas
Mm.
Rue Blanche was looking God, like she's a 7-year-old woman. And part of it's the hairstyle, and part of it's social norms and the way people dress, and also like what Kate Beckinsale and some Hollywood types look like may not be necessarily overly realistic, but we've got changing norms about what aging looks like and feels like. And with the growing popularity and understanding of the power of resistance training and
Mm.
healthy nutrition and a little bit less sun worship and not as much smoking and alcohol as we get older. So I'm 46, but as we get older, we're noticing that there's a greater disparity. You look around and you see the people your age, you go back to old high school reunions or what have you, or even people younger than you who
Mm.
look a decade plus older than you. And this is not about judging, but it's about putting into context when we pay attention to our health and our wellness. It has all these benefits we talk about. We'll get back to the kind of the falls and the breaks and the bone mineral density stuff, but you just look and feel younger. And if your identity feels younger,
Mm.
then life's different, I think, than what we saw in our parents and our grandparents' generation. And we're starting to see people who are older than me understand this, who've been practicing it for a while, and they're reaping the benefits and the rewards.
Mm,
And we as people are so short-sighted about instant gratification. And we, in the fitness industry, we preach personal control, which apparently is this like right-wing whole, I'm not even fucking like social ideological nutbaggery, but like the idea, I saw a post recently, and this sort of shit makes me mad. And I normally don't react to stuff on social media. I didn't comment on it.
mm,
And it was like is a dude, and like I could tell his social media reeks of social ideological, progressive leftism, right? There's a lot of like
mm,
really sort of stuff that drifts far. And made a post about something to the effect that the majority of men's health outcomes are predicted by their income levels.
mm,
And then there's something embedded in there that sort of like demonized wellness influencers who like preach, personal responsibility or like control. Like actually, it's like this is really dangerous and really stupid. First of all, it's
right.
conflating causation with correlation. It straight up is. It's pandering to, and I see a lot of status building and audience building by
Mm,
of some people in the industry, and they're pandering to, a victim mentality and the type of person who wants to be told, hey, it's not your fault. Now, it's not about
mm,
throwing around blame. I'm very careful about that, but we're talking about
right.
responsibility and like, but empowerment. You disempower people when you tell them, well, because of your genetics and because of your zip code and because of
Mm,
statistics or what have you,
mm-hmm,
then there's no point. And that's the message. And that really is a message. So it's this coddling of, listen, it's okay. Don't worry about it. It's beyond your control.
mm,
So just you be happy and content with your lot in life. And it's like, and then to turn around and I see this a lot. There's another pet peeve of mine when they demonize the fitness industry as a whole, as if the industry is like all bad. What you're
mm,
training people to do is to mistrust our industry and all of the really good, amazing, wonderful people like you and I were just at Coaching Con, right? And we've been at other events. And we're surrounded by these caring coaches who want to better themselves and to actually be able to help more people, right?
mm,
Scale their ability to positively impact more people, earn a good livelihood while doing it. And if you're one of these grifters, these influencer
mm,
type grifters who is making yourself look good and playing status games while demonizing our industry.
mm,
And yes, our industry has bad faith actors. And traditionally there's been, you know, bigger weight loss companies and marketing that has been at very best questionable. And you see Oprah over the years peddling and platforming all sorts of
right.
really bad ideas and bad people, like a Dr. Oz, verifiable charlatan. And it's tough enough as it is without someone turning around and going, there's no hope for you. You know, just resign yourself to your fate. They're
Mm,
there and listen to my social ideological bullshit,
mm,
instead of going, here are the tools. Here is how we can, in a very, very reasonable way and actionable way,
mm,
get you on the road to self-improvement and better health. Because
mm,
we have evidence all around us that there are plenty of people who actually want to change their lives. We have plenty of evidence of the people who, take action. And
mm,
yes, there's going to be differences in terms of access and opportunity. We know that, but that's not an argument to say, well, don't bother. So it's a
mm,
little bit of a pet peeve of mine. And I usually practice this. It's like I see something on social media I disagree with, and I just walk on by. I'm like, I'm going to ignore that. Like, but every once in a while, I see something I think is so detrimental under the guise of
mm,
good morality. It's like, this is absolute bullshit.
right.
And it's actually hurting our industry and it's hurting people.
Mm,
And yeah, it gets me mad. Now, I
I
also
get
think
that.
that I think I saw something else just before I came on here.
Yeah.
And it's a friend of mine who I like, who I think is deeply thoughtful and evidence-based. And he had posted up and he took a caption of another guy that I know who is more of the tough love type, to say the least, who's got a very blunt message.
Mm,
And I think that they both kind of, one goes a bit too far one way and one goes a bit too far the other way in terms of some of the stuff I think gets a little bit ideological.
right.
But one is kind of calling out the other one. I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, okay, there's also different messaging for different people. And while I cannot get behind the idea of like over, quote, fat shaming type messaging, I think that's,
Mm,
we know that's generally harmful. But tough love messaging, there are people that respond really well to it. There are people who have
mm,
changed their lives because I had an old client who, before he even met me, he'd lost 100 pounds on his own, sought me out to lose more weight, but to learn strength training. And he lost an additional 85 pounds with me. So I think it was a
Wow.
lifetime 185 pounds. He's a
Mhm.
tall man over 400 pounds. And then we rebuilt him back up with muscle, and got stronger, stronger, really enjoyed it. But along the way, he shared that his life was just inactive and eating lots of junk food. And there was a day where I think he was buying McDonald's or something. And I can't recall. I think it might have been him going to the bank and just the way that the teller like was looking at the transactions. There was some sort of like thing
Mhm.
that just a switch went off and he was embarrassed, right? And I don't think that the teller did anything overt, did not like say, "Oh my God, look at how much McDonald's you're buying," or anything over
Mhm.
like deliberately shameful. But there was a moment where he just kind of felt embarrassed, and that was a catalyst for change. And guess what?
Mhm.
The kind of change that it incentivized is completely set his long-term metabolic health on a different path.
Right.
So I'm also very loath to police out, different types of messages that I think can get people moving. So it's
Yeah.
tricky because where do you draw the line? And there's some stuff that goes
Mhm.
past the line.
Yeah. Well, I think you touched on a shit ton just in that. So I want
Loads.
to talk, I want to say a few things. This was amazing. Well, one, because when you talked about how first celebrities back in the 80s, 70s, 80s look drastically different than celebrities of our day now, right? I remember seeing it was like a photo of like, um, I think it was Jason Alexander who played George Costanza, the guy from Cheers, right?
Yes.
Do you see
Yeah.
that? And it was just
He's,
like them
he's
in
in
their
mid
30s.
30s.
Yeah,
He's in his
and I was
mid
like,
30s,
holy
right?
fuck. I'm like, that is
Now,
absolutely crazy.
yeah, when he started out as George, and
Yeah.
there's also something else. I'll give you an example
Yeah.
of this phenomenon. So we tend to, especially if a celebrity is
Mm,
visible and stays visible across very like a long period of time. You see them in the
hmm.
media. Patrick Stewart might be the best example of this. Okay,
Yeah.
so for anybody who remembers Patrick Stewart as Captain Jean-Luc Picard, the Star Trek: The Next Generation, it
Yep.
aired in 1987. Okay, and more recently, we're now starting to see memes of the original Dune. I think Dune was like 84 or 85. The David Lynch movie, not the, I think it was Lynch, not the new one, right? And the old one is kind of considered to be pretty cheesy, but Patrick Stewart's in it. And he plays the same role as God, I'm not sure which actor he played. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
Hmm.
But Patrick Stewart's always looked like an older gentleman, right? As
Right.
Captain Jean-Luc Picard, always looked older. And so then we've seen him through the X-Men movies, and
Hmm.
he's quite visible on various media. And now, if you watch Star Trek Picard, he's much older again. But if you go back and you actually put him, Star Trek Picard last few years versus like Jean-Luc Picard the first couple of seasons, you're like, oh, whoa, there's a visible difference. But we've seen enough of them graduating over time that when we see someone now, we project how old they look. Morgan Freeman's another good example, Christopher
Hmm.
Walken, a lot of these actors, Jack Nicholson, that we kind of equate with as being quite old. And we think of them as always having been old, whereas like Tom
Hmm.
Cruise and Brad Pitt have always been kind of young. Like Keanu
Right.
Reeves, always young. Paul Rudd, always young. And Paul Rudd does not seem to be aging in any sort of visible way.
At all.
Career.
That's crazy.
But we tend to anchor them, and if they stay visible. Now, there's another thing. This is a bit more of an obscure reference, but does anybody know who Tom Welling is? Tom Welling was Superman in Smallville, right? Before Clark
Oh,
Kent,
yeah, yeah,
before he was
yeah.
really Superman, right?
Yeah.
Young, good-looking young man. And that show, you forget how like that show goes back a little bit. So he had disappeared from public eye. I don't think he really was acting, and all of a sudden, like some photos of him surface. He's got grayish hair. I mean, I think he's only in his early 40s, but
Mm,
it's like, wow, like what a shocking difference in terms of how he looks, because you have this guy who was really quite
true.
famous in his like probably like latest of his teens, earliest of his 20s, and
Hmm.
aged through, but stayed looked young looking, into someone that pops up again at a fairly major shift in life, plus also like features like a little bit of gray can really
Hmm.
transform. So it's funny how we experience and see this stuff. It's like the friend of yours that you see regularly on social media or regularly in person, very
Hmm.
visible to you, versus the person that you haven't seen in 20 years. You go to a high school reunion or whatever, and you're like, whoa.
Yeah.
But that's still magnified even more by lifestyle behavior, right?
Hmm.
Physical
1000%.
activity, good nutrition, all the other things we talked about. I have friends who they don't look like they've aged in over 20 years. And then I know people that I'm like, what? I'm not saying it, but I'm thinking like, my
Yeah.
God, what happened?
Right. Right. Absolutely. Well, yeah.
So let me bring it full circle because we talked about, slip and fall injuries.
Yeah.
I think we sort of saw that stuff as being inevitable,
Mm,
when we were growing up. But now, the more we understand it, the more tools we have to reduce. We can't
mm,
guarantee, but we
right.
reduce the likelihood of someone dealing with bone mineral density loss, and because postmenopausal women, due to the changes in estrogen
Mm,
through menopause, are more susceptible to demineralization of their bones, and obviously they I think the statistics are they suffer 75% of like the hip fractures. They fall more often. They do statistically, they do fall more often, but they
mm,
suffer substantially more hip fractures, like femur fractures, that sort of stuff. And when you have that kind of injury that late in life, it's catastrophic, because then all of a sudden someone may go from being somewhat active and social to being sedentary and probably not getting out as much. So their social interaction is going to suffer, their mental health is going to suffer.
mm.
And it's very, very common to see a very rapid drop off. And I can't remember the
Yes.
statistics on it, but for the ones that don't die, and there's a significant number of people who die from those kind of falls anyway, but
Mm.
a further significant number die within a year of
Wow.
such a fall. So you get into these kind of scary statistics, and it's like, okay, then you get these Muppet influencers who are telling you, oh, there's nothing you can do. It's okay.
Mm,
Or get really crazy lies like there's no relationship between your long-term metabolic health and your level of adiposity. Like, holy fuck. Like, that's a dangerous lie.
right.
And you're misleading people, right? You're
Mm,
killing people with that kind of stuff. That sounds a little extreme, but
mm,
sort of the Pied Piper, if someone knows that metaphor, right? And it's an apt metaphor, because we have these idiots playing status games on social media, going, "Hey, I'm going to say some really crazy stuff, outrageous stuff that's going to make people feel better about
mm,
themselves." That's actually going to actually quite insidious and quite dangerous long term if you follow
right.
this advice. So what do I want? I want more people to get their butts moving around enough,
Yep.
like put load on tissue bone. Like, I think Michael Easter's treatment of rocking in his book, The Comfort Crisis, is actually a really good thing for people to kind of poke around him. And it seems to be probably the most potent tool we may have to keep bones strong, right?
Mm,
Specifically bones. Obviously, resistance training is one of the best tools we have for muscle strength. Muscle strength means better balance, less likely to fall, more structure, and more ability to handle impact if you actually do fall, right?
mhm,
There's some differing studies on survival rates if you have a bit more fat versus a bit less fat. That stuff seems to be conflicting a little bit, but in theory, if you have a little bit of cushioning, it might actually help. So you
oh,
don't want to get too
1000%.
skinny or too lean. There's detrimental health effects from getting too lean, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, and that's another one of these weird things. You see a lot of influencers saying things like, how do I explain this? They say that losing body fat is bad, or they imply it's bad because of, quote, eating disorders. Like, okay, eating disorders are actually quite insidious. There's some really, really dangerous stuff. Okay.
Mm,
But the fact that an eating disorder is harmful to your health, okay, is not evidence that the opposite is not also absolutely horrendously dangerous long term to your health, which is too much adiposity. There is and I don't know how to define the exact body fat percentage. It'll be different between men and women. And there's not necessarily one-to-one relationship between your cardiovascular metabolic health and your level of adiposity, but there's going to be more of a
mm,
relationship than a lot of people think. If you are actively engaging in resistance training, cardiovascular training, you have a higher body fat percentage, you're still going to be worlds healthier than the person who's not doing anything, right? The
mm,
activity, resistance training activity is the key. Usually, better nutrition, and you're burning more calories usually when you're more active, to the point where usually there's going to be a relationship there, right? But what I get frustrated by saying is things like, when people, and I will sometimes use the word grift, maybe it's not the right word, but they will try to deflect from the danger of long-term poor metabolic health due to extreme, excessive adiposity, by saying, well, ooh, if you get too lean, eating disorders are dangerous. It's like,
mm,
we do have a problem with eating disorders in our society, but we have an epidemic, an absolute monstrous epidemic of the statistics of metabolically unhealthy people walking
mm,
around, who are, obese, et cetera, what have you. And sometimes people get really twisted about BMI. Okay, BMI, not overly useful for an individual, but as a societal like metric of these sort of like risks, it's actually very accurate.
Mm.
There's going to be someone who's listening that's going to be like just mad at everything I say, and but
Well, fuck them. But I think,
no, if anything, I try to treat this stuff with nuance. It's just I don't
yes.
subscribe to the extremes of the messaging
Hmm.
that, like I said, I think is just Pied Piper pandering to develop
Right.
likes and likes to build status
Hmm.
within a little bit of an ideological tribe. And ideological tribes can be all kinds of stuff. Like,
Hmm.
keto or carnivore or vegan are
Right.
all a type of ideological tribe.
Right.
So,
Well, I
and they all
think,
tend to be fairly extreme, to be
yeah,
honest.
absolutely. Well, and I was gonna say I was gonna have you introduce yourself, but I feel like this our whole tangent we've had so far is like this is Andrew Coates because you, like you just said, you subscribe to putting, load on people's bodies so they can get stronger, get, have good metabolic health, and also, talk about a lot of the bullshit that's out there that a lot of people tend to subscribe to that handcuffs them, right? So I think if you can give me, why don't you give me a little bit more? Because I know your thoughts are going to go a little bit crazy, but if you can give me a little background too on a little bit who you are, like and a little bit of your journey as well. Because I know you and I can just fucking talk forever. But I
I
want
sort
people
of
to know who you are too, so they could get to know you.
I subscribe to the notion because I host a podcast, I host a conference,
Mm-hmm.
various other things, and people often and I write for a whole bunch of publications.
Mm-hmm.
So I write for T Nation, Men's Health, Muscle and Fitness Magazine,
Mm-hmm.
Barbend, Generation Iron, Kabuki Strength, so on and so forth. So, and oftentimes I'll get people. My editors are funny, so they get people all the time hitting them up, going, "Hey, how do I get featured? I've got a really great
Yeah.
story, right?" And my editor at Men's Health, I always tell the story. Eb Sama, he's always says he said on a podcast with me, he's like, no one cares about your story. And I think you have to give people a reason
Mm-hmm.
to care about what you're doing and
For sure.
value your contributions to the industry before they're going to care about your story. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, nobody cares about a story about some unknown figure, but they're interested in a book about like Barack Obama or Arnold Schwarzenegger or somebody else or Elon Musk, someone else who's
Mm-hmm.
famous, accomplished a lot, et cetera, right? So
Mm-hmm.
me, started as a trainer at 32, always been really interested in fitness stuff, played sports growing up, very lucky that my parents were very, very encouraging of sports and were really progressive in giving us a lot of home cooked meals. I mean, yes, I was very lucky, right? Like, had that good
Mm-hmm.
fortune. Went to university for business degree. Did not even imagine I'd have a career in the fitness industry. Went into banking for a while, wasn't for me. I've worked in casinos, I've worked in the bar industry, I used to own a nightclub, I've done a lot of interesting stuff, right? Life experience is really valuable when you get into our world.
Mm-hmm.
And I moved across the country at 28 and ultimately got into the industry at 32. It was a job, right? I fell into a job and I realized pretty quickly I enjoy this. I'm good at it. My clients are happy. I'm getting referrals. I'm staying busier. I got really damn busy, became the top session performer and one of the top by dollar sales value trainers in the company I worked for.
Wow.
Eventually left just because the environment was really toxic. After 6 years, I'd spent a lot of time and effort there. Went out on my own, contracted my friend's gym, my friend John, who is the owner of Evolve Strength. So he's my partner in our conference.
Mm-hmm.
That came later. Along the way, started a podcast, started to travel to a lot of different fitness conferences, met a lot of people through the industry. I started writing for my own website.
Mm-hmm.
Along the way, T Nation invited me to come write for them, then True Coach, then Generation Iron, and then the rest spiraled. So when you can put in your bio that you write for all of these big fitness publications, it gets people's attention. So
Mm-hmm.
upon that platform, I also turned around and started getting really serious about social media very late 2019, early 2020.
Mm-hmm.
And that's grown quite a lot over the last 4.5 years to where, okay, we can honestly say there's a fairly substantial social media following there. And through traveling, through the media following, the ability to leverage like just a lot of relationships with coaches,
Mm-hmm.
and going to events, I've gotten invitations to speak at a lot of things. I was up on stage at Coaching Con. Me and Luca Hosevar did a
Mm-hmm.
presentation panel. Um, the last few years has just been kind of wild for that. So that's
Mm-hmm.
been exciting and rewarding. But it's a byproduct of just head down, putting in the work, the time, the effort. I still
Mm-hmm.
coach full time. I have online coaching stuff.
Yeah.
I'm still writing. You know, I recently did a presentation for a virtual event that'll be aired soon, probably already done by the time this is live, but called the Real, I'm sorry, not the Real Coaches Summit, sorry, the Recovery and Sleep Summit. My friend Nick Lamb does it. And a lot of it's about boundaries and,
Mm,
your value systems. And the reality is, like, a lot of coaches, especially early if in your career, if you really want to do all these things,
yeah.
it's not a 9 to 5 job. But I don't think someone who's passionate about it would want it to turn it off at 9 to 5. I think I wouldn't know any other way to live. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Right? I can't shut it
Yeah.
off. And I'll take a little bit of time here and there. I recently got Baldur's Gate 3 and
It's finally you downloaded
finally
it.
downloaded it. I like grew up like I don't know if there's a video component of this, but anybody on
Yes, there
audio,
is.
over my shoulders, you got like some Witcher figures. I love Witcher 3.
Yeah,
The
hell yeah.
show actually was very disappointing. And then once
Yes, it
once
was.
Henry Cavill
Henry
left,
Cavill's gone.
not
Not
remotely
watching
interested in
anymore.
continuing. It's very, very disappointing. But so I grew up on that kind of stuff too, right? So
So,
I get this Jack Meathead, and I grew up on Dungeons and Dragons and RPG
uh-huh.
video games, and
So,
that stuff's great. Anyway, so
eh,
there's weird meandering story there,
yeah.
but along the way, just got really lucky. I was in the right place a lot of the right times, which is
Mm,
something I think of as a surface area of luck. I really like this concept where if you just put
mm,
yourself in rooms, literally metaphorically, show up time and time again, support other people
mm,
unconditionally without any expectation in return. I think a lot of people are just in too much of a rush and they're too
yes.
status seeking. And you just do good things. You find ways to add value to other people's lives.
Mm,
You focus on the client in front of you. You just a be of service mindset all of the time. And
mm,
people will share you and they'll support you and they'll bring more people to your doorstep, whether it's your social media or train with you as
mm,
referrals, to where these things compound over time. And if you give it enough runway and enough touch points with enough opportunities, good things and invitations keep happening. So, and you can leverage those things to share and support other people, and then more good
mm,
things keep happening. And it's a compound
mm,
effect. And we think of that in terms of like investing dollars in a bank account, right?
mm.
But
Yeah.
it's a very real principle when it comes to our social interactions, our careers as well.
Mm,
And the compound effect of relationships is one of the most underrated and yet most important things that I think for any coach. And I don't know if your listeners are more coaches or enthusiasts.
probably more enthusiasts, I would
Yeah,
say.
for the
Yeah.
enthusiasts, you can look at this in your career or just life in general. The more good that you put into the world through the positive interactions you have with all the people, the more that it tends to come back on you
Mm,
by an order of magnitude greater, and the richer your life tends to be. Right? We all
mm,
know those kind of people who are just takers. They all they can think about is like what's in it for them, and you
mm,
realize you don't really want to be around that person, right? Their energy, they steal your time, they steal your energy, money, God only knows what. And pretty quickly, you get tired of being taken in those situations. So you don't want to spend those time with those people anymore. And then they have to move on and find someone new. And then they exhaust their supply of people. Whereas the people who you just find yourself wanting to be around because they're kind and giving and abundant and wonderful and
mm.
are inspiring, right? You gravitate to that.
Yeah.
And I I don't know if it's like some people can kind of wake up and go, wait a second, I've been taking this long and now I need to give back to the world. I think it's probably a little bit more innate, or I think some people kind of develop a victim mindset and they feel like they're very entitled to a lot of
Mm,
stuff and they don't get it. So therefore anything, they think that when you interact with people, someone else has to lose for you to win. And that's the wrong attitude.
mm,
I think in this particular case, because we have some crazy people out there who like would say 1 + 1 = 3, but in the context of abundance, you take the input from one person, the input from another, and each person gives, and the result is greater than
mm.
the individual input. So one plus
Yeah.
one actually does equal 3 in that metaphorical sense.
Right. I love, and that's like one of my lessons in life that I'm so grateful I learned early on is giving without expectations. So my question for you is like when did you learn that lesson and did somebody teach you that lesson? Like how and you already said how it shaped you, but like how like what age did that click for you where you're like, wow, like it's more than me.
I really don't know. Like,
Mm,
I don't have these magical inflection points where I'm like, oh my God, I've been so misguided this whole time, and
yeah.
here's this. uh, I think along the way, it's like there's a lot of years and a lot of different interactions with people and reading a lot of books and being inspired by a lot of different resources. I would love to think that it's innate and it's always been there. I don't think that's necessarily true either. I think when you're younger, you don't necessarily have a grasp on these sort of things. Some people
Right.
get there. Some people are just naturally like awesome this way.
Mm,
They figure it out as children. And I think other people just it evolves over time. But I cannot pinpoint anything. I remember my
Mm.
dad, giving me the book, Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People, which of course the
Oh wow.
title sounds kind of like
Right.
almost manipulative, but it's fundamentally a really good book about just taking interest in other people, make it about them,
Yeah.
right? The most interest you have an interaction with someone, right? Or two people. And in the first interaction, the other individual talks 90% of the time. And the second interaction, that person listens 90% of the time. Who do
Mm.
we find more interesting? The person who actually just listens because they allow us to do the talking. Now, you also have to be
Hmm.
on guard against always talking. But what I've noticed is I've interacted, you meet tons of people across the industry, but there are a handful of people that stand out above and beyond, and they make it about the other person, right?
Hmm.
If anyone's ever familiar with Jade Tata, Dr. Jade Tata, Jade's been on my podcast a couple times, and Jade has just got a way with language that he just acknowledges you and makes it about you and says kind things about you. Like, just to give an example, it's like I want your listeners to actually like zero in on the fact that you have this really kind, abundant energy, and I can tell immediately you make it about your guest, right? I've appeared on podcasts where it was very obvious to me that the host was less interested. In fact, I cut one episode that was never aired off halfway through because I was invited on this podcast and this host was really just like, he did 90% of the talking. I was like, what's the
Mm.
point of me even being
Yeah.
here? And then he's like telling me and trying to like talk to about like, we're talking about full-blown conspiracy theorist nutbaggery, right? And it's like,
Mm.
and I cut him off halfway through. I was like, listen, man, I'm not interested in this shit. Like this just
Mm.
isn't working for me. I'm out. Peace, right?
Mm.
And he was cool, but that was a weird experience.
Mm.
But yeah, I wasn't interested sitting there and just taking my time. And that sounds selfish, but there's the dynamic. I'm the one who's being invited on as a guest, right?
Right.
So, but you go the other way. You are genuinely interested in what me and therefore other guests have to say, which
Mm.
makes you feel good, right? So makes me feel
So we're
good.
all feeling good, baby.
Exactly, right?
So, so-
Interesting dynamic, say the least.
yeah.
I think that book is a really foundational book. I mean,
Mm.
it's been around for what, over 100 years, I think now.
Oh wow,
And
I did not know
there,
that.
I can't remember what the phenomenon's called, but there's this phenomenon where the longer a book or some other type of media,
Mm.
Shakespeare's plays would be a good example, Mozart and other famous composers,
Hmm.
the longer a book has been in print, the greater the likelihood that it will remain in print for longer. So I think it's like if the book's been in print for 10 years, then
Mm.
the likelihood is that it'll be in print for an additional 10 years. But if
Mm.
a book has been in print for 50 years, then the likelihood is that it will be in print for another 50 years.
Mm.
So, and it basically just the classics, the really, really good stuff just sticks around. And I can't remember what the principle or the law is, but it holds up really, really well.
Mm.
Anyway, so Dale Carnegie's book, it's a classic. There's a few others, Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich. I can't even remember
Yeah.
what's in it. I've read it, doesn't stand out to me, but it's still around.
Hmm.
There's a few other ones.
One of my favorite. I'm not sure how old it is. Have you read The Alchemist?
So no, I haven't, but I know that The
Ooh,
Alchemist and The Secret are largely just
true.
what is the fundamental principle behind it? The law of attraction, effectively, right? It's like
Yeah, yeah. Like
and
finding your omen.
yeah, so law of attraction is both a real and a completely bullshit concept. So you can't. It's like the Hormozy quote. Like you don't. I can't remember how it goes, but it's like you don't. You're not successful by shouting affirmations in the mirror.
Right,
It
right.
does nothing. But so you are who you say you are because you generate a stack of undeniable proof. It's something
Mm.
the Hormozy quote's sort of like that.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like what I was saying earlier about getting out and putting yourself into literal metaphorical rooms
Mm.
where you're meeting people, you're supporting people, doing, you're learning, you're putting yourself in a position to create that surface area of luck. And through the sheer magnitude of these touch points with people
Mm.
and the opportunities you create for others and abundance and giving and positive interactions with people, the more people take notice and the more opportunities end up coming your way. So that's the law of attraction. That's actually what
Mm.
it really means. You can't
Mm.
just like wish it and will it into being.
Right.
It's about action. It's about consistently taking positive action, being good, kind to other people, being supportive.
Mm.
But getting off the couch and going out into environments that are probably scary. Like I think Anthony Bourdain, I like his messaging
Yes.
around this. And of course that's
Yes.
more about, sit down and like sit in this little corner restaurant and experience the food and
Hmm.
try I used to always order just the same predictable, reliable shit when I go anywhere. But I just get into a bit of Bourdain's messaging, and I'm not a classic fan. I didn't like
Yeah.
follow him until like he more or less came onto my radar after his death.
Hmm.
And I read one of his books, and it's just so good. But I see people share his quotes. Some of the stuff's great. It's just about just be a little bit more adventurous, be a little bit more carefree. It's not about being reckless, but it's just try different things, put yourself in different places, go travel,
Hmm.
have the different drink. And so I don't drink much anymore. I used to own a
Hmm.
nightclub. I've been on the other side of that party lifestyle. If I'm sitting down in somewhere, I'll look at the menu, and instead of ordering the predictable, safe thing, I will try a different kind of beer, or I will try a different kind of liquor or something like that. And then I look at the menu, and instead of getting the old reliable thing, I mean, I know what I'm going to like or not like, but I'll order something different on the menu just to try something different. So I have a slightly
Hmm.
different experience. And I found that I've rarely been disappointed when I do this. And
Hmm.
life's a little bit better and a little bit richer when you get on the plane and you go to the different spaces. Again, like we're at Coaching Con, right? I get to see
Hmm.
you, and we're there with Jared Hamilton and just so many other great people in the industry. I've got a whole bunch of friends. I met a whole bunch of really great new people that are, have already enriched my life. I get a whole bunch of time. Me and my buddy Lucas spent a whole bunch of time together. We speak at a lot of events, so we just like kind of hang out, have a lot of dinners. And my career has directly benefited from actually like having a
Hmm.
seat at that table because Lucas, brilliant, right? Really
Hmm.
successful, really inspiring. And it's always giving me ideas to level up, right? Being in an environment like that gives me ideas to literally level up.
Mm, that's so true. That is so true. And I think, again, to your credit, I think you have done an amazing job of sort of pursuing and showing up to those circles, to those events, and being adventurous in your own right. Right. Because I'm sure, I mean, I can only speak for myself where putting myself in those positions where you have to be that social person when you're really just introverted and very like I can play video games all day type of personality. So I give you a ton of credit because you really have you been in all sorts of parties where people are able to recognize you. They acknowledge you for being very authentic and being a great contributor to the industry and all that. So I think that's also a testament to exactly what you've been doing, right? You're leading that action and setting that example to not just say this is what I want, but leading and having action to get to that.
The point about authenticity, I find it funny when people say that because, like, as opposed to what? In being inauthentic, that has to be exhausting because the very
Yeah.
definition of being inauthentic is not being true to yourself. It's sort of like fabricating a lie, a persona, right?
Hmm.
And if you have to put on a persona, I mean, one of my best friends is ASD, autism spectrum disorder.
Hmm.
And I'm not an expert on this, but she'll sort of explain how you kind of have to put on different hats and masks or whatever to like function in society sometimes. It's fucking
Hmm.
exhausting. Like it's
Yeah.
literally exhausting. It's truly exhausting to have these sort of interactions like that. And I don't know if that's everybody's reality or if it's like a truism, but it's the way she's explained it to me, and she really
Hmm.
studies the hell out of this stuff. But if you and it's not fair to equate someone who has autism and being inauthentic. That's not in any way what I'm suggesting. It's just I
Hmm.
understand that people have to function that way. But as an analogy, if you're going around in society and you're actually being inauthentic,
Hmm.
then just the act and the effort to keep it all together. It's like someone who's lying, right? Like people keeping their lies straight all the time. You ever met a pathological liar? They're really sort of
Hmm.
funny, insidious creatures where they just randomly make shit up, and it starts to unravel pretty quickly because you see through all the bullshit. So keeping
Hmm.
all that stuff straight, it's got to be fucking exhausting. So the answer to that is just literally just be authentic. And I
Hmm.
think you can be in different environments, like can bring out different aspects of your personality. And I think that you can have fun with maybe being like the more playful and grandiose side of your persona. There are figures,
Hmm.
people in the industry who have like big personalities on their media.
Right.
And if you meet them in real life, they're fundamentally the same person. It's just sometimes they play into the character that they are a little bit, but the character is an extension of their true essence and personality. I use Lane Norton
Hmm.
as a really good example of that. Lane has this like big, bombastic, sort of like super outgoing, gregarious sort of personality, and he's a really wonderful person when you meet him. But he's still got that like outgoing, intense energy when you meet him one on one. It's just I think it gets
Mm,
it's plugged into a bit of an amplifier when he's on stage or he's on social media. But
mhm.
it's fundamentally him.
Oh, absolutely. And it's so true how how fucking draining it is to try to pretend to be somebody you're not, right? Like no matter what, it's always gonna like it's like small talk. Small talk drains the fuck out of me. It's like I can only talk about the weather or your flight for so long until I'm just like, fuck, like this is I can't talk about this anymore. But
It's like dealing with clients, right? If you can't bridge a gap
yeah,
with mutual interest, which makes the
right.
experience more enjoyable, I think this is where a lot of coaches go wrong, in fact. And I
Hmm.
think anybody, like, again, sometimes I talk through the lens of like the fitness industry coach, but for all the enthusiasts listening, you have interactions with people that you struggle to find common ground or interest, but yet you have some sort of obligation to interact with them. It's
Hmm.
probably quite draining. Whereas
Hmm.
think about the people you like being around. They're the people you found some common ground, right? You know, like talking about video games with them or music or you just geek out over work. It's okay to geek out over your work, right? There's something in your world, right? Maybe, there's a shared interest over having kids. I don't have kids, but I know a lot of parents bond over, the kids' activities. And we know that like sports, holy shit, right? I Me personally, I can't sit down and like watch. Like I grew up watching a shit ton of sports. I played sports, but I watched
Hmm.
everything from tennis to golf. Andre Agassi, Steffi Graf. Oh my God, they were so
Yeah.
good. Right. When I'm younger, like again, I'm dating myself here. I grew up, I watched like the Blue Jays 92 and 93 World Series wins on
Wow.
television. And I remember watching like somehow along the way I became a Calgary Flames fan in hockey, right? And I watched the 89 Cup final, right? On my little tiny television when I was a kid up in my room and stayed up late to watch game 6 where Calgary beat Montreal on Forum Ice.
Mhm.
And that was a big deal, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, yes, like when I'm a kid, I'm doing that. But now I just don't have the time or interest. I keep an eye on what's going on in the box scores. Like for baseball fans, I just saw that
Yep.
Mike Trout, who's one of my favorite baseball players, even though the Angels are just inept and useless.
Yep.
Just he has a great April, hits 10 home runs, and now he's got
Torn
a torn
meniscus.
meniscus in his knee. And it's like, this guy's so awesome, but he's missed so much time to injury. It's
Yep.
so sad.
Mhm.
Or I'll keep an eye on like Alexander Ovechkin's chase to beat Gretzky's all-time record
Let's
of
go
goals.
Rangers,
I like Ovi.
baby.
I like Ovi a lot. I really do. So I want to see him break that record.
Yep.
And so there's a little bit of that, but I won't
Yeah.
sit down and watch games because I'm not interested in investing the time. But
Right.
it's actually a useful skill to be able to know and keep up on enough of this stuff because I have some clients who are one of my clients. We've known Eric for 16, 17 years. I used to deal poker to him in my old life and my
Hmm.
the old job before I was a trainer. And Eric is very passionate Blue Jays fan. So anyway, we end up talking a fair bit of Blue Jays. So I get like lots of my Blue Jays info from when I train him. And so we bond over this, right? So it's actually like a really fun hour. But for me, the
Hmm.
idea of sitting down in front of the television for like 2.5 hours of my
Yeah.
evening to watch baseball, especially in the current incarnation of Blue Jays and utterly inept and terrible, is very frustrating. And because they're supposed to be really, really
Yes,
good,
they are.
young, talented players are just not performing. So I also remove my emotion, even though I sound like I'm emotionally reactive to this stuff. I've removed myself from these really strong emotional reactions
Mm.
to, the outcome of sports. And honestly, I think it's one of the best things I've ever done is to not, have my entire identity and emotional thermostat regulated by what's happening with my favorite sports teams.
Hmm. Yeah,
Right.
absolutely. It's a lesson I'm still learning with
And
when
like
it comes
I
to
know
NFL.
so many people so many people here are just gonna be like right because
Right.
they love their sport. No, listen, please. And I also believe very much like do not steal others' joy for the things they love. Like my friend Nick Shaw,
Right.
one of the owners of Renaissance Periodization, he loves Michigan, right? Just everything Michigan is
Mm.
just like it's on his media, right? So it's
Hmm.
part of who he is. But I mean that's his thing. He's very passionate about it, and that's
Hmm.
fine. Like I think we should have our passions. I love the band Tool, right? I'm wearing the Tool
Hmm.
shirt right now. That's kind of part of my identity, right? So like I can criticize people that Tool isn't on television, 162 games a year, disappointing me terribly. Like I get to go to a few concerts and it's just a magical experience, right?
Right.
Put on the record anytime I want. I don't have to watch them
Hmm.
lose to the Yankees,
Hmm. And
right?
I and I love that you have because you do have good, you do have cool eclectic taste, right? Because I think I commented on your record collection and also your video games, all these other things. But I think it is so true. It's we're able to create those deepening bonds, whether it is over sports, whether it is over music, right? And it's really what you're kind of connecting over is like your experiences with those things, right? Like the first time you heard a Tool song, or like that first Blue Jays game, or that Calgary Flames game you saw, and maybe you're watching with your family and all these things. I think that's really like the cool part about all these interests that we have, is the experiences and the memories that we connect with and that we then share with someone else.
There's also another element to sports that's a little tricky too. It's a modern proxy for battle, right? So
Mm.
without the bloodshed, like the Roman gladiatorial arena, right? It's entertaining masses, that sort of stuff. And that's a complicated thing, but ultimately, when it serves as a proxy for like geopolitical conflict, when it in fact works, because I think like cricket matches between India and Pakistan are probably kind of dangerous things anyway, right? The sort of shit that like probably like referees get killed over, and I shouldn't
Mm.
joke about that. I guess I know that like in South American soccer, they take that stuff very seriously,
I
right?
think so.
Jesus. But on the average, I think that yeah, people will just enjoy their sports and cheer for their team and
Yeah.
get their frustrations out when their team wins or loses. It's probably a
Mm.
lot better than the alternative. So
Oh,
yeah,
1000%.
that's a
I
random thought. We've side quested a lot on this one.
That's okay. Hey, I'm all about my side quests. Okay, those are you go side quest, main quest, side quest, main
On
quest.
stuff like this,
That's
if anybody like
RPG.
likes if likes their Geralt Witcher like 3 the game, I mean, you understand just the degree to which that like Geralt gets. It's sort of a running joke about just the degree to which he like gets lost in side quests and how much time he fucks around doing all these
Yeah.
things in the game. It's the way the game is made. So sometimes the conversations end up like Witcher 3. If you've
Oh,
never
I'm
played
all
Witcher
about
3, I highly recommend
the
it's
hunt,
whitewater.
baby.
Yeah.
Wild Hunt. They
Well,
actually they like remade it for PS5. They like did a remake like randomly and launched
they
it
update
of the three.
they did
Yeah.
a fairly substantial upgrade to the game because it's
Yeah.
I think it's almost 8 years old now or something along those lines. It still holds up
Hmm.
very well today. So
Oh yeah,
pretty
it's
good games.
amazing.
There's
I do.
here's a random thought for you. Everybody listening,
Yeah.
if you're old enough to remember this, if anybody's ever gone back and played Nintendo games, you can
Oh
go
yeah.
and you can play Super Mario Brothers on Nintendo, okay? And it's like hyper pixelated, but you can play the game, it's fine, right?
Mhm.
And now you see some of the stuff, and it's like almost like AI hyper realistic sort of graphics, these things, or like they're really smooth. But there was a period of time where things got really like advanced pixelated, and you can't go back and play it. If you ever go back and try to play Star Fox for Super Nintendo,
Mm.
oh my
Hmm.
God, is that unplayable? The graphics are horrendous. If you're a Elder Scrolls games fan, so Skyrim, big popular thing. Oblivion before it is
Love Skyrim.
amazing. I
Hmm.
love Morrowind, so that's the one before that. But
Yep.
once you played Oblivion and Skyrim, you can't go back and play the graphics on Morrowind because it's kind of
Right.
of that generation where the
So
graphics are
true.
just like so badly pixelated that they're so dated.
Yep.
But yet you go
Yep.
back a generation before it with this old Nintendo stuff, and it's still magic. You could play it on a Game Boy or whatever. And it's just like it's nostalgic.
Hmm.
It's wonderful.
Oh yeah, it's so true. I mean, I literally still have my N64 and my like and the Nintendo Switch lets you play like all those old games. It's so true how it's just like back then it was like this is the most realistic shit I've ever seen. Like these graphics are insane. Now you're like, fuck, I can't even tell where his nose is. This is it's crazy.
Oh,
Oh man,
oh,
that's
fun
amazing.
times.
Yeah,
The
dude. I do have a couple more questions for you
Sure.
before we hop off because I know you had a long day.
Yeah.
So first question is because you are a major writer, right? Like you contribute, like you mentioned, a lot of popular articles and magazines, all these things. What like were you always a writer? Like what got you into writing? Was it like was it fantasy things like Dungeons and Dragons that kind of captivated your interest for that? Like what was
Honestly, for sure. And no one's ever asked this question this way, so I like this. I liked writing when I was a kid. So I would write stories. I liked reading novels. I liked like kids' adventure novels. I had the Hardy Boys books. My parents got those for me when I was a
yeah.
kid. That stuff was really cool. Um, and then when I was young, I got into Dungeons and Dragons books, but I got into like the Dungeons and Dragons Forgotten Realms novels.
Mm,
Right? Your Drizzt Do'Urden, Crystal Shard, R.A. Salvatore type stuff. If anybody knows the reference, if not, sorry, right? So there's a whole bunch of stuff there. And so I collected a ton of those over the years. And as I got older, you have your periods where you kind of get in and out of stuff. I was
Hmm.
always good at the skill of school. So I always had really, really good grades, which doesn't necessarily prepare you for the real world very well, right? You just get good at that skill. So go to
Hmm.
university, do well at that. And the writing stuff actually came much later again because obviously I like reading. So I've read a lot of fantasy fiction novels over the years. You have your pockets right in and out of doing it. And then I got partway through my career, I've been reading a lot of Teen Nation very early. So I'm reading a lot of fitness articles, stuff that Precision Nutrition is putting out. And then I remember Precision Nutrition sharing this list of books that they liked. And one of them was Switch by Chip and Dan Heath. There's a bunch of other stuff. So I started reading a bunch of books years and years and years ago, like uh, Ryan Holiday's The Obstacle is the Way, and Seth Godin's
Hmm.
Linchpin, and Greg McKeown's Essentialism, and there's another book, The Slight Edge by Olson. I think it's Jeff Olson. Anyway, so those are kind of foundational. The books you read earlier are going to be the first time you're exposed to a lot of these ideas. So they're going to be more
Hmm.
memorable. Right? A lot of this stuff kind of gets regurgitated, rehashed in other forms later on. And so it just blurs together. And then I just continue to both consume all this sort of stuff, but I also think that consuming is a really emotionally soothing way of procrastinating from actually creating and doing the hard stuff, building business, creating media, et
Hmm.
cetera. And I encourage coaches and people to like find your creative expression. For me, it's writing. So I wanted to write because I just wanted to start writing for my website. I didn't have any visions of writing for Ben's Health or any of these other things. I just wanted to write.
Hmm.
So my friend built me a website. I got started, and because I'd already been doing it, I got connected with Danny Sugar, one of the editors at T Nation, and Danny saw what I was doing, and Danny turned around and asked, "Hey, would you come write for us at T Nation?" I'm like, "Holy shit! I've been reading T Nation for years. I've looked up to a lot of the longtime authors, writers on there, and all of a sudden I have this invitation." So I lean into it. I have a huge pile of books on writing over my shoulder that I've studied writing. I did well with the writing in university. I did like first year English. Most people have to,
Hmm.
but I did well with it. Most people struggle with it. And so I've always felt comfortable with the idea of writing, but I've always wanted to continue to advance the skill. Don't just rest on your laurels and think, hey, I'm really good at this. Like always invest in learning. And then more opportunities happen. So I kept writing and writing. And
Hmm.
I'm actually not necessarily that prolific a volume writer in terms of articles. I know people, my friend Lee Boyce has written like so many more articles than I have. But I try to really make sure that anything I write is impactful, it's well thought out. I don't like writing
Hmm.
like spec stuff for different websites. I like having, all right, here's my ideas that I think will move the needle and really help people, as opposed to writing here this formula article for SEO for this website. And I've done a little bit of that, just because of some of the connections, but it's not my favorite thing to do. I would rather dive into a topic in my own authentic expression of it and
Hmm.
in a way that I think will help the industry, contribute to the volume of education that's out there. And over
Hmm.
time, I've just kept doing that, and the results have grown. And I've now pivoted back to I still write for these some of the big publications, but I'm also trying to contribute more to my website. I was neglecting writing for my website where I was serving all these other masters.
Hmm.
So
Right.
that's kind of the story of that.
That's amazing, dude. And I think and I love again how it kind of ties back to when you were a kid, how you're reading these Dungeons and Dragons and like you said, I think it's a direct link to probably why you love so many of these RPG storyline driven games because the written word and the actual story is what contributes to the enjoyment for playing through it. I have one more question, then I'll send you into the sunset.
Deal.
Um, so the name of this podcast called These Little Moments, and basically the reason I named it that is because one of the little moments that sticks out in my life, I was at one of our mutual friend Jordan Syatt's seminars, and at the end of it, everybody's just kind of, sharing like their binge eating history or things they struggle with fitness and things like that. And for me, I felt compelled to talk about my mental health for the first time before, I ever told anybody about it. So I shared for the first time my anxiety, my depression about it. And to me, that was the major catalyst or big moment, or little moment in my life that kind of got me to where I am today, where I'm able to vocalize more of my mental health and all these things. Is there and I know you mentioned how you don't really see things as like these little cataclysmic moments and things like that, but is there something that sort of does stick out to you in your life that you perceive as gotten you to sitting in that chair today?
Oof. Um, I'll sort of take this in another direction, and it may answer it in a roundabout sort of way. I'm often asked, and I dislike the question, if I could go back in time and give my younger self a piece of advice,
Mm,
and what would I do differently? And I always say I would never do that. Right. I know it's a thought exercise to like, all right, what's one piece of wisdom, whatever. But my thought
mm,
is literally, I think in terms of kind of the quote, the butterfly effect. If you were to go back in time and say something, but do something differently or earlier, then it would have changed the trajectory of everything. And so
mm,
there's been some bad decisions way back in my past, or like mistakes or bad luck or bad occurrences that set me on a path to travel across the country, which is a fairly major inflection point in my life. I wouldn't have the career, I wouldn't have had the opportunity, I wouldn't have joined the gym that I joined, which ultimately I kept
mm,
getting bugged by staff to come work there. I kept saying no until I said yes. So along the way, there have been too many just like seemingly minor incidental things. There was an old a poker player I used to be good friends with. Unfortunately, had to distance myself from this individual. But in getting to know him many years ago, probably with 16, 17 years ago, and him becoming a very good friend for many years. And then as I'm going to this gym, it just so happens that he also works at this gym. I see him there, and through him, I meet his trainer. And that's the trainer who's still a friend of mine to this day, who kept bugging me to come work there. It's these odd little occurrences that,
mm,
you know, create such, you don't even realize how significant those inflection points are. And it sounds nice to have this grandiose thing that, oh, I had this great revelation or whatever. But honestly, I think everything is a product of continuing to just roll with the situations that I've been put into.
mm,
Try to genuinely treat people well, unless they give you a good reason to otherwise.
mhm,
Um, your reputation, your integrity, your honesty, all of these things. Continue to practice these things in a non-negotiable fashion.
mm,
And for some reason or other, the last several years, a lot of people have shown up to give me unbelievable amounts of support, opportunity, like
mm,
opportunities I couldn't have dreamt of. Right? To get featured in Arnold Schwarzenegger's email newsletter, to
mm,
get to do a presentation at an official Olympia weekend event, small side event, but still an official Olympia event, to be featured in a print edition of a Muscle and Fitness magazine special edition that was distributed at the Olympic, as Muscle and Fitness no longer does a monthly physical copy of anything in stores. These are things I couldn't have dreamt of, but they're actually the
mm,
byproduct of so many things that have added up. And in a big way, it's due to like relationships of just trying to support other people. And
mm.
every time I got an opportunity, is A, I don't want to let the people down. I will go and aggressively work on the skills if I don't already have them. And that's something I think a lot of people just feel entitled to stuff. They're not willing to work for
Mm.
things. And it's an unsexy message, but I'm willing to put my head down, pay my dues, work really hard to get something. And when I get those opportunities, I try very hard not to screw them up. So I
I
hope
love
that
that.
answers the essence of the question.
It answers the essence, and I think it also it's testament to what we originally talked about, how you put your head down, you gave without expectations, and I think what you're starting to notice now is sort of those fruits of your labor, right? And having people recognize your amazing things that you're contributing, your willingness to continue to give to others. So I think, like I said, everything you are receiving right now is well deserved. So super proud of you for all you're accomplishing, all that's going to happen. And like I said, it's because you give without expectations. I think that's as long as you hang on that, my man, I think it's going to work out just fine.
Well, Ryan,
So
you're
I
always
appreciate
amazing.
you.
It's always great to see you at these events. I
Yeah.
appreciate your positive influence on this, and I like the way that you are showing up and supporting and platforming and doing good things for other people. So for everybody listening, you know, it's obvious that Ryan is very passionate about this and enjoys it. He radiates just good energy through this. So there's a reason why you're here. So share this with someone else in your world that you think this sort of thing will be valuable to. Yeah, we got off topic of fitness and we meandered through a lot of stuff, but I think there's a lot of good life stuff here. Anyway, I hope you guys all found it interesting. Thanks for tuning in. I appreciate it. And if anybody has any questions, I respond to everything on Instagram, so I'm more than happy
Mhm.
to answer fitness or unrelated. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate it. And please share where people can find you too.
Uh, at Andrew Coates Fitness on Instagram. All roads go through that. Obviously, my website, andrewcoatesfitness.com. I have articles on there. And I have my own podcast. I've got to be a little more consistent. I've done it for so many years. and it's
Mm.
called the Lift Free and Diet Hard podcast. I have a pretty impressive lineup of guests over those
Mm.
years, so I'd love to see you there. But please support and share Riot with someone in your world.
I appreciate you, buddy. Well, thank you for being on, and I'll see you very soon,
Thank you.
everybody. Thank you, man.